Hi guys, I'm going to read a couple more chapters to you, and we're in chapter 15. Where it ends, it also begins. Kind of an interesting statement, don't you think? The three explorers stood motionless, silent, barely breathing. The door was open. Now what? It was as if they hadn't considered the possibility that they might actually succeed. With their hearts in their throats, the twins walked toward the door. It was massive and heavy, set into a sturdy frame. Beyond it, they could make out a room that was dimly illuminated by the light from Argo Manor's stone room. What do we do now? Asked Julia, peering in with fascination. Well, let's check it out, Jason said. Rick remained still, unwilling or unable to make a decision. Seeing that Jason was about to cross the threshold, Rick cried, "Wait! We can't go in there. We're not prepared." Julia groaned. "Ugh, we're not going on a camping trip," she told Rick. "We're just going to take a look around." Rick shook his head. He said, "It could be dangerous." He said, "We got to think of everything we might need. Candles, 2 parchments, the dictionary." Julia resisted the urge to make another withering observation, because Rick might be right. After all, he'd been the one to figure out how to open the door. "He's right," Jason said. "There might be more secret messages to figure out." He ran up to the tower room and grabbed the Egyptian dictionary and the box full of small clay balls. Rick checked his lighter. It still worked, then dashed into the kitchen to get a knife. "I'd like to have some rope," he said. "Do you guys know where we can find some?" "Oh, come on," Julia complained. "We're not climbing Mount Everest. Don't be such babies." With that, Julia turned her back on the boys and crossed through the door. Jason followed her. The twins were swallowed up by the darkness. Rick, bring your lighter," Jason cried out. "We can't see anything here." "I'm coming," Rick shouted. "Don't take another step. There might be a well or who knows what in there." Then he lit the candle and joined his friends. The glow from the flame of the candle gave the room a kind of neat and weird shadows dancing on the walls and the ceiling. They were in a small round room made entirely of stone. There were 4 stone archways, including the one they'd come through. The floor consisted of large square blocks. It felt as if they were inside a medieval tower. Rick used the flame from his candle to light 2 others, and he handed the candles to Julia and Jason. They searched the room looking for, well, they weren't exactly sure what they were looking for. 4 pathways, Rick mussed. 4 choices, just like in the message. Jason repeats some of the lines from memory. Of 4, 3, the motto will show. Of 4, 2 mean death on the spot. And 1 of 4 will lead below. Oh, can't say I'm crazy about the death on the spot part of the poem, Julia whispered. Rick laughed softly. "No, we'll try and avoid that." Jason was fixated on the last line, and he murmured it aloud, running his hands along the walls. "1 of the 4 will lead below. 1 of the 4 will lead below." "Look at this," Rick said suddenly, and he drew their attention to small figures that had been engraved on the stone archways that spanned the doors. "These look like a herd of charging bulls," Rick said. "I guess," Jason said. "The engraving is so primitive that like it was done 1,000 years ago." "Here's a little school of fish," Julia announced and pointed above another door. "What are those?" "Moths," Rick stated. "Sphinx moths, to be exact." The expression on Julia's face was of utter disbelief. "Where do you come up with this stuff, Rick?" "Sphinx moths? What are you talking about?" "Sphinx moths wake up when the sun goes down," Rick answered. "There's another name for them. Hawk moths. I believe those black hairy ones you see every once in a while." Julia gave a grimace of disgust. "Ugh, this archway has birds," she said. "What kind of birds?" Julia shrugged. "You're the expert on everything. You tell us." Rick studied the engraving. "Albatrosses," he said. "Wandering albatrosses." Julia looked at Jason. "Where do you get this guy?" "Rick does seem to know a lot of bizarre animal facts," Jason said with a laugh. Rick raised his hand in apology. "It's interesting stuff. The albatross is a migratory seabird. They're called wandering because sailors thought their calls sounded like the birds were lost at sea, crying out for home." "It's kind of creepy," Julia said. "Let me see," Jason said, and he sat down beside Rick and read the letters. He noticed that one point of the message there were 2 A's next to each other. "Let's try separating them," he said. Rick drew a line between the 2 A's. Or Masuba Abasma Rapsip. That doesn't make any sense. Don't tell me you speak Swahili too, Julia said, and she paused a beat. You're kidding, right? No, Rick earnestly said. I remember seeing the word in the dictionary. Really? I think so. Let's try and look it up. Rick pulled a heavy dictionary onto his lap and he leafed through the pages of the oldest languages. Jason and Julia watched over his shoulder, fascinated. Here it is, Rick cried out triumphantly, pointing to the chapter of the dictionary titled The Language of the People of the Moon. He read intently. It says here that the word suiba means swift or swiftly. Let's try to translate the rest of it. Hey, Jason suddenly noticed, you can read it both backwards and forwards. They're the same. A palindrome, Julia whispered. Rick eyed her with a look of surprise. Hey, she protested, I pay attention in school sometimes. Sure enough, by starting with the two A's and reading the letters from left to right, the kids found the word abusrom, and they read the same thing moving from right to left. But that wasn't all. Once they arrived at the end of the message, from both right and left, they could continue reading it, starting at the other end as if it were a ring. As Julia had said, it was a palindrome. It could be read both backwards and forwards without beginning or an end. A magic sentence. A sentence that, at least at that moment, meant absolutely nothing to Jason, Julia, and Rick. While Rick and Julia took a brief rest, Jason threw himself wholeheartedly into translating the message from the so-called language of the people of the moon, whoever they were. Fortunately for Jason, it was as if the Dictionary of Forgotten Languages had been made specifically to help him with this task. Using the information from the book, he managed to identify and separate the various words that composed the palindrome. When the words had been divided and organized, the motto read like this: Espet omero swiba abius rememat epsi. At that point, the Dictionary of Forgotten Languages did miracles. In less than a quarter of an hour, Jason had all the words translated into their modern equivalent. He proudly read the decoded message to his partners. We move swiftly in the night, fearing the blazing fire. Well, Julia said, does that mean anything to anybody? Finally, Rick spoke up. I know which door will take us below. He walked up to the door which they had entered, the word on which the albatross was engaged. As I said before, these are migratory birds. At night they sleep on the waves, on rocks, or on boat docks, which means we can eliminate them, since they don't move swiftly at night. He walked over to the door with the fish, and he dismissed it with a wave, commenting, Fish don't worry about fire. Enough said. He stood before the door with the herd of bulls. But these animals might move around at night, and they might be afraid of blazing fire. Hunters in ancient times used fire to hunt them, driving entire herds off cliffs. What a way to go, Julia said. But, Rick said, I don't think the motto refers to them. I don't think they're particularly swift at night. It doesn't fit. Finally, Rick walked up to the final archway, which opened up into an impenetrable darkness. He raised his candle to light up the shape of the three moths that were carved into the stone. The motto is talking about these moths, he said. They move swiftly at night, and they are afraid of blazing fires because fire attracts them and destroys them. Julia could now make out what appeared to be the shape of a skull carved on the back of one of the moths. But if this is the right doorway, why is there a skull carved on that moth? A skull to me means death. Rick disagreed. It's not a skull. It's just a spot on its body which looks like a skull, but it's only an illusion. You sound pretty sure of yourself, Jason said. Rick stared at the engraving. That's because I am. He said, this is the way. Jason reached his arm out, pushing the candle toward the dark passage, hoping to glimpse something of the path ahead. He said the message said, 4-3, the motto will show. Of 4-3, the motto will show. There are 3 moths engraved in the archway. Rick's right. This is the way to go. Rick paused. Remember, guys, we don't necessarily have to do this now. Oh, please, said Julia, pushing him out of the way. We didn't come this far just to quit. Let's see this through to the end. The stairway. Despite Julia's bravado, Jason took the lead. He lowered the candle to get a better view of the passageway. There was a flight of steep steps that led below. This is it, he cried. These stairs are going down just like the message says. Rick and Julia followed him cautiously. The steps were carved into solid rock, as were the walls that surrounded them. The further down they went, the more they could smell the pungent odor of the sea, which carried up by little gusts of wind. The walls were covered with damp, glistening layers of brine. Jason kept pushing onward, leading the way, not looking back. He was about 5 stairs ahead of the others. His candle cast glimmering reflections on the stairway's rough stone walls. Little by little, the darkness became deeper and deeper, and the light from their candles seemed to get dimmer and dimmer. Jason, Julia called, suddenly nervous. The drafts of air are becoming more and more insistent. Something felt wrong. I'm not sure about this. Maybe we should go back up, figure things out. Jason didn't reply. He only pushed onward. Moments later, he cried out, Rick, Julia, come and see this. Julia instinctively grabbed Rick's arm, and they made the rest of the way down hand in hand. The stairway had come to an end. The ceiling of the passage was only slightly higher than their heads and sloped even farther. A few yards ahead of them, Jason had bent over to move aside some rocks that were blocking the little tunnel. The rocks let in streams of cold air which whirled up along the stairway. Jason, Julia said. Fear was grabbing a hold of her. Her brother motioned for Julia to be silent. He moved the last rock and lifted one finger toward his ear, gesturing for them to listen. And now they heard it. It was distant and muffled, yet unmistakable. It was the sound of the sea. The grotto, Rick whispered. We're getting close, Jason said. It sounds like it's right on the other side of these walls. Julia looked at the narrowing black tunnel. It didn't seem safe. What if we made a mistake, she said. What if we came through the wrong door? Jason ignored her fears, and he got down on all fours and used his candle to light the tunnel. Every instinct in his body told him the same thing. Go, explore, lead the way. And he crawled through the opening. Rick and Julia heard him panting and struggling. Then moments later, Jason exulted. I did it! I'm standing up. Come on, guys! What do you see? He motioned for Julia to go first. I'll be right behind you, he said. The passageway is taller now and keeps going straight on like before. And then wait, I think it turns to the left. Julia muttered unhappily as they climbed through the cramped tunnel. The rock was cold and damp beneath her fingers, and it scraped her knees and hands. I should be in a shopping mall, she grunted, not crawling through tunnels like a mole. But just as Jason had said, she soon came to an opening, and she stood up looking for her brother. Rick emerged from the tunnel after her and reached out his hand, and she helped him up. I'm getting too old for this, he joked. Julia laughed. Maybe there was hope for Rick yet. It's nice to see him loosen up a little. She brushed the hair from her face and noticed that her skin was cold. She held a candle to Rick's face. It was streaked with dirt and sweat. She clutched the dictionary of forgotten languages in his hand. Julia's gaze fell on the book. I'm not letting go of this, he said. Rick turned his head all around, trying to get his bearings. We should have brought some flashlights, he commented. True, Julia said. A ham sandwich wouldn't have been a bad idea either. They heard Jason's footsteps farther ahead. We better hurry if we want to catch up to our fearless leader, Rick said, and he took Julia by the hand and they hurried to catch up with Jason. Finally reunited, the three kids walked together in single file. First Jason, then Julia, then Rick. Then the tunnel turned sharply to the left, and they were struck by a whoosh of air that immediately blew out the candles, and they were in the dark. Thud. The noise came from above, high above. Rick listened. Hard. Guys, you know the door we came through to get here? Well, I think it just slammed shut. A wave of fear rippled through Julia. Something clammy brushed against her arm, and she let out a shriek. Hey, it's only me, Jason said. He held his sister firmly by the arms. It's just me. Let's stay calm, all of us. They huddled close together. We need to light the candles again. Rick pulled out his lighter and tried to light the candles, but the cold drafts kept blowing it out. It's impossible to do it here. We'll have to find a better spot that's protected from the wind. If we form a shield, it will work. Forget it, Rick replied. The wind will only blow the candles out again. We'll have to make do with the flicker from this lighter until we can reach a better spot. Let's go back, Julia said. We can get flashlights and supplies. We're not really prepared for this. We can't go back, Jason replied. I'm sorry, Julia. There's no other way. The door to Argo Manor is shut. I have the keys, Rick said, patting his pocket. I'm not sure that will help, Jason replied. Were there locks on this side of the door? I don't remember. There was a long moment of silence, broken only by the howling of the wind and by an eerie, muffled sound of the sea crashing against the rocks. I don't remember either, Rick confessed, and I guess I should go back and check it out. No. Don't go, Rick. Let's stick together. She touched his arm with her other hand, and she touched Jason's arm. All of us. I'm better now, she said. It's just a dumb case of nerds. Let's figure this thing out. Using the flickering lighter to show the way, they began to explore their surroundings a little more closely. Well, that was weird, Rick said. When we turned, there was a sort of blast of wind, almost as if we moved these rocks. We created an airstream leading up to Argo Manor. That's what made the door shut. Jason considered it carefully. The wind only started when we reached right here. It's like air is coming from somewhere nearby, but where? Jason slowly inched forward. Beneath his toes, he felt something. The wind rose up from his feet into his face. Oh, no, don't move another step, guys. There is a pit here. That's where the cold air is coming from. It was true, where there should have been a solid rock floor, there was none, only emptiness. I get the feeling that someone doesn't want us here, Julia said. What do you mean, said Jason. I said the air current blew out our candles. We're trapped down here in the dark, so we would fall into the pit. Rick quoted a line from the message, a 4-2 mean death on the spot. You and me, Julia, we almost fell down that pit together. That was really close. I'm not convinced, Rick said. Think like scientists for a change. Air travels in currents. It moves to fill the void. He made a sweeping gesture with his arm. The air current was pulled up from upstairs. The window at the top of the tower must have opened again. Could be, Rick agreed. Sure, the window created a draft between the round room and the stairway. You opened up the passage. And now we're stuck down here next to this huge hole. Jason drifted into thought. Then he spoke slowly, as if he were thinking out loud. Do you guys think that if we got past this hole in the floor, we could light our candles again? Well, how do we get past? We don't know how deep it is or how wide. We don't have anything to light the way. We don't have a rope, and we don't even know what's on the other side. Rick tried to keep his mouth shut, but found that he couldn't. I told you we should have brought rope, he chided. Julia punched him gently on the shoulder. Next time, Rick, I promise to listen. It was probably as close to an apology as Rick was ever going to get. We have to go back, Julia said. There's no other choice. Once we get there, we'll see if we can open the door from the inside. Sounds reasonable. It's like you said. What choice do we have? Well, Julie must. Another option is we could stay in the freezing tunnel next to the black pit of death and die a slow, agonizing death by starvation. Oh, you're hungry again, aren't you? Rick joked. Famished, she said. I'd give anything for a chocolate bar right now. Julia turned to Jason. Jason! Then louder. Jason! He was gone.